This is your Daily 5 for Tuesday, January 20th, 2026. After we both enjoyed watching 1960s Black Sunday, I thought, okay, let's follow that up with another Mario Bava film, this time from 5 years later, and one that is wildly different in nearly every respect. So we're, again, 5 years later, we're going into science fiction, and we're going into color, same director though, and that's 1965's Planet of the Vampires. Now, a quick bit of warning up front. And this is not really a spoiler. This is just so people have the proper expectations. For a movie that is titled Planet of the Vampires, I'm just going to tell you up front, no vampires. In fact, there's a weird thing I found out about after the fact of watching Black Sunday and this movie, that both movies had very, very literal vampire elements that, well, in Black Sunday's case, they actually had still images showing some of the leads wearing fangs as literal vampires. And out of the many titles that Planet of the Vampires had, they chose the only one really that is probably the least fitting because it includes an element that does not exist in the film. Now, some of the beings in the movie might be, I guess, interpreted as metaphorical vampires or have vampiric elements. But if you come into this expecting literal space vampires, you're not going to get them. So I'm just telling you that up front because I don't want people to be let down. I have seen reviews where people were very upset that there were no space vampires in this film. So, quick warning, no vampires. Having said that, this is a beautifully made, low-budget, classic science fiction film. And I mention low budget because one of the things that is, you often hear about how movies didn't have enough budget to achieve blah, 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 blah. And sometimes it feels like an excuse. And other times when I see a movie like this, I think, and this is why the excuse thing kind of bugs me, is where I think it is. You see a movie like this where they had very little money, and yet some of the most gorgeous, atmospheric, well-made science fiction for its era and what it is that you're going to see. Even Lando, who is not somebody who necessarily pays attention to that stuff as much in every movie as I do, even he was saying, wow, this is a beautifully made film. With very simple in-camera special effects. They did not have the money for really expensive compositing. They weren't doing anything. The models, when they're in space, you can see the strings. But still, putting all that aside, this is a well-made film that otherwise, in terms of the storytelling, again, like Black Sunday, relatively simple until you get to the end, but we'll talk about that on Friday. But otherwise, kind of a straightforward movie, what will seem like a familiar title, and in fact might seem very familiar if you've ever seen the movie Alien, because many people have said that parts of the story for Alien were lifted from this film. There's debate over that. It honestly doesn't matter. There is definitely overlap, whether that's just great minds thinking alike, or if Dan O'Bannon or Ridley Scott had seen this film. And certainly when you see the spacesuits, you have to assume Ridley Scott watched this at some point, because boy, oh boy, do they look really similar to the Prometheus spacesuits. But regardless of how much inspiration was shared or what was lifted or whatever, this is just a really beautiful film to look at. And that helps because it is fairly limited in terms of the fact that you can tell they're always on a set. This is not shot on location anywhere. They were basically reusing the same sets more or less and just changing things in the background. The cast is fairly small, and it does appear to be made up primarily, well, maybe not primarily, but there are quite a few Western actors in this, and they feel like they're still acting in a Western even though it's science fiction, but I think that adds to the movie. The main lead captain, in fact, had done a lot of Westerns and TV work. So where the movie perhaps does not have as much at its disposal as other bigger budget, bigger star, bigger name films, it makes up for it in the atmosphere. It's amazing how much can be done with inventive camera work, really good placement of lighting, and a fog machine that can fill a scene. Once you have those things, you can make up a lot of what's missing in terms of just making something feel richer than it is. So I think it's a really beautiful example of the fact that good filmmaking can overcome a low budget. So I would, again, like Black Sunday, for classic horror fans, if you like older science fiction, then I would absolutely recommend 1965's Planet of the Vampires. Just remember, no vampires. Later.